Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the first 22 verses of the 24th chapter of the book of Proverbs. Herein we read of the 19th through the 30th sayings of the wise, which marks a distinct literary turning point in the book of Proverbs. It comes near the tail end of the 22nd chapter, then it kind of closes with the first few of them. The 23rd takes us all the way up to the number 18 of these 30 sayings, and not every verse is a saying. So what I've done is I've listed the origin of the saying itself. I'm going to read them verse by verse just so you get a frame of the literary context in which it emerges. These are 30 wise sayings chosen for whatever we don't even know. We have the faith that the Ruach Kodesh inspired it to be there, and it was his stamp and his seal. So that being said, that covers that. We're going to open with the opening verse, which reads, this is the 19th saying, "Do not envy evil men, nor desire to be with them." So the temptation that evil men prosper in the ways of the world. They are more adept and more at home in the ways of the world. So often the evil prosper seemingly at the expense of innocent and righteous people. So then the temptation is to become like them, mimic their ways. But here we are advised not to envy them, because it's not going to end well for them. They may amass all the fortune and all the wealth and all the prestige on the planet Earth, but if they do it out of some evil motive or become evil on the way, it's not going to end well for them. And you shouldn't even want to be company with them, because their influence is going to rub off on you. Who you are is who you spend time with. And if you spend time with and surround yourselves with evil men, eventually you will become evil, and you are more evil as a result of even spending a single conversation with an evil person, in fact. "For their heart plots to ravage, and their lips talk of trouble." So no good or positive outcome can come from the conversation of evil men. They're always plotting, always scheming to screw someone over, to cause mayhem, trouble, or disruption. And ravage, that means just take what doesn't belong to them, without manners, without anything along those lines. It's all about me, self, self, self. And that is the way their heart is oriented, and that is the way their conversation is directed. The 20th saying begins, it's also 2 verses. "By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established." The term house in the Hebrew original denotes 2 things. It denotes a family and also the structure under which the family would dwell. So when we think of this as a family, building a fully functioning and productive family is the product of wisdom. A lot of planning goes into it. You have to control the relations with your spouse and also the upbringing of your children. So it does take wisdom. It's not the chance of accident or happenstance that one has a successful and fully flourishing family. It is cannot be done apart from wisdom, at least most of the time. And understanding is the foundation. Understanding certainly needs to exist between the parents themselves and their children and all the siblings. So understanding is key and critical to coexisting in a communal relation anywhere. "And by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches." So wisdom and the pursuit of gain are not always necessarily interchangeable. Solomon certainly managed to combine both, at least for the majority of his life. He used his wisdom to increase his fortune and to build extravagant palaces and building projects in the temple. So, that wealth, maybe a part of it was necessary, but ultimately he grew too extravagant in his building projects, compelling him to rely on non-Israelite native conscripted labors in the land of Israel. This was technically a violation of the law, because there was one law for the stranger in Israel and there was one law for the Israelites alike. The 21st saying, "Mighty is the wise in strength, and a man of knowledge strengthens power." This is a mind over matter victory, because Strength is no substitute for brain power. If you look at the Roman Empire, for example, the average Roman soldier was perhaps less fierce and ferocious and physically intimidating as their average barbarian counterpart, but the barbarians didn't have, most of them anyway, didn't have anything even remotely resembling the application of scientific principle to strategic warfare, whereas the Romans did. So that is one example of they were smarter than militarily smarter than the known world, at least. The barbarians ultimately overcame them, but of course at that point the majority of the Roman army was barbarian mercenaries, but that's getting a little far away. So there is a power in matter, and the mind can triumph over it if it is in fact wise. So it's better to have wisdom and brain power is a force to be reckoned with far more than the ability to lift heavy weights or move heavy objects or anything like that, or to wield a sword or anything like that. And the way we increase in our power is by increasing our knowledge, because knowledge is power, and we increase our strength in our practical utilization of it. The more we acquire, the more consistently we seek, and the more diligently we find. For by wise guidance you wage your own battle, and delivery is by a great counselor. Now, we already kind of covered how to win battles through wisdom. It almost seems antithetical to apply human wisdom to a destructive activity fitted only for beast, yet practice none so prolifically as the beast of man. But there is, as we already covered, a strategic advantage from being wise in the ways of the military. But great counselors, now as a king, as a royal ruler, every royal ruler would have been surrounded by advisors. And Solomon also comments on this elsewhere. I think somewhere else he says, get as many as you can, because the depth of the perception and the overlapping of expertise gives the ruler the broadest panoramic view of which to approach the problems. And advisors exist to protect kings from going to their ruinous self-destruction, as many of them would otherwise do. 22nd saying, wisdom is high for a fool. He does not open his mouth in the gate. That's the whole of the 22nd statement. So wisdom is beyond the reach or grasp of the fool. They have no inclination towards it. They have no interest in it. They have no ability to gather it. So it's too high for them. It's beyond their reach. They're going to be foolish probably the rest of their lives, and that's just the way it is. But it would be far better for a fool if they were in the scenario when they were at the city gates where official city business and transaction was conducted, that they just held their tongue, because a fool delights in speaking but not listening. So if the fool would only learn to listen, they might actually begin to learn. But that is, so he's saying better to be foolish and silent, better to be silent if foolish, than to make oneself known so they're going to be completely out of place in the company of the civilizers of any civilization or society. 23rd saying, he who plots to do evil is called a master of evil plots. And rightly so. There's really no argument of that. There is a degree in mastery. Certainly there are amateurs who conduct amateur plots, but a master is one who is an expert in the field of his choice. The purpose of folly is sin, and the scoffer is an abomination to men. So folly leads to sin. Folly, foolishness, stupidity, etc., ignorance leads to sin, because we don't think about sin. We don't even think about much at all except our own immediate gratification and how we can get what and who we need to screw over to get it. So that is foolish and ignorant thinking, and it always it inevitably and invariably leads to sin. If it's not a sin in itself, it certainly is the gateway to a great many sins. And scoffer, no one likes a scoffer, including and especially Yahweh. He scatters the schemes and plots of men to the wind. 24th saying, if you falter in the day of distress, your strength is small. That's the whole 24th saying. So adversity makes the strong and breaks the weak. Now, one of the most endearing qualities of the saints is their perseverance and persistence and endurance. So the straight and narrow, we're not gonna make it to where the straight and narrow leads without falling several times over. But what do we do when we fall? We get right back up. We dust off our shoes. We reorient our feet and keep moving ahead. And guess what? We're going to fall eventually later too. That's part of the human nature. The born-again believer is not, the propensity to sin is not eliminated in their capacity. It's their heart has been redeemed, but they still walk in the flesh. But the weak, the would-be, the fair-weather Christian, they're gonna be persecuted for it eventually, and then they're gonna throw in the towel because they do not have the endurance or the stamina to walk the straight and narrow where it leads to, which is why we're all heading, and I hope that's why you're here. 25th saying, deliver those taken to death, and hold back those stumbling to the slaughter. So this would have been a heroic thing to do as the rescuer of those. Saving lives is something heroic in itself. Of course, taking lives too, at least on the battlefield, can be heroic. But as terms of murder and killing of your own people, it's heroic to prevent that stuff. And you gotta sometimes intervene lovingly with those you associate and surround yourself with to keep them from stumbling to the slaughter. So when we see a fallen brother who's on the straight and narrow, or even if he's off, we should lift him up and prevent him from walking the way they are currently walking, which is going to lead straight to their own slaughter and self-destruction. If you say, we did not know this, would not he who weighs the heart discern it? He watches over your life. Would he not know it? And he shall not repay that man according to his work. So what he's telling the Jewish audience, this is written to an Old Covenant people, the Jews, they could not plead the excuse of ignorance. They had the law, they had the writings, they had the prophets. Yahweh had directly and specially revealed himself to their community, so they could not plead ignorance at the judgment. And this falls in this to interpret this in a salvific lens. The question, with revelation comes the greater responsibility. So we Christians are more privileged yet more duty bound than the Jews, who have the incomplete or inferior revelation. So with revelation comes responsibility. It's my personal contention that our judgment is decided in proportion to the revelation that we are given. This is supplemented by passages such as Paul's 2nd chapter, where he suggests, in my interpretation, that the Gentiles will be judged. The Gentiles before the age of grace, which he was coming to deliver them, would be judged according to their conscience, which is their equivalent of a law. We have this all divinely embedded moral radar in ourselves, and that is what a species of general revelation. So we all have an ethical sense and moral sense, but even if that can perhaps save the pre-grace Gentiles, the only way we Christians and Jews can be saved is by grace and through faith alone. And where all our deeds are going to tally up, we'll be judged by our works and our words. We read in Matthew 12:37 that every idle word we utter, everything we forgot we said, everything we hid in the dark will be brought to light at that day if we're not careful with our words. 26 saying, my son, eat honey, for it is good, and the honeycomb sweet to your taste. So honey is sweet, it's a delicious delicacy, and he's advising this is going to bleed into the next chapter, next verse. Know that wisdom is thus your soul. If you have found it, there is a future, and your hope is not cut off. So wisdom is exponentially greater even than honey. Wisdom is sweet to the soul, whereas honey is sweet to the tongue. But if we have wisdom in our hearts and it transforms our soul, we will have a future, and an eternal one at that. and our hope will not be cut off so long as we stick with it in the life we now have and live. 27th saying, do not lie in wait, O wicked, against the dwelling of the righteous. Do not ravage his resting place. These are things the wicked would be inclined to do, being wicked by character and nature. So he's telling them not to do what they think they should do, because that's a wicked person is going to lie in wait. They're going to strike a person when it's dark out, when they're most vulnerable, and just rob them and rape them and pillage them. That's what wicked people do. For the 7 times a righteous man falls and rises, but the wicked stumbles into evil. So we actually said much of what we could have said in the 10th verse. I'm reminded that the existence of trials and persecutions and setbacks really make the strong and break the weak. So the fair weather Christian, the lighthearted disciple, the one who caught a wave of energy and enthusiasm when hearing the call, but then when he is embracing the calling, he finds that the Christian life is not a constant high, and our lives are not guaranteed to be more comfortable as a result of taking the call. So they're going to run at the first sign of trouble. As soon as they get persecuted, or whether made fun of just for witnessing, they're going to hold their tongue pretty much for the rest of their lives. But 7 times a righteous man falls, it is a righteous response to keep on going, to not giving up, to not letting what should be defeats and battles determine the outcome of the war we are engaged in, because whether you like it or not, when you were called, as soon as you became God's son, you became his soldier. We are all in the battle, whether we like it or not. Moving on, 28th saying, do not exult when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart rejoice when he stumbles. So there's a misnomer, I feel, that the love for enemies is an exclusive doctrine to the New Testament. We find several examples of this, not only in sayings but in deeds throughout the Old Testament. One personal example I can think of is Solomon's father, David, who loved Saul even though he was his enemy. He wouldn't kill him, he wouldn't strike him, even though he had the opportunity to cut him to pieces twice. He had a respect for the anointing that the already anointed had lost, and he couldn't bring himself to prematurely bring about his enemy's demise, because his faith and his trust in Yahweh were total. He had faith that he would work it out for his own time, and he would endure the trials and experiences that came in the process of waiting. But here, it's no one likes a sore winner. There's such a thing as a sore loser. There's also such a thing as a sore winner. These are the ones who gloat in your face, do the obnoxious touchdown dances, and no one really likes them. It's out of place. Just because they're enemies doesn't mean they're not people. You should not kick a man while he's down. And, that when they stumble, that's not good for you. It's bad for them, but you don't have to think it's good for you by taking pleasure in the fact that they are stumbling. That is just makes no sense. Lest Yahweh see it and be evil in his eyes, and he turn away his wrath from him. So the little things we do, the silent delights we take in our hearts over the destruction of our enemies, that is all transparent to our Maker, who sees the contents of our hearts and the nature and orientation of it, and that is what he judges on. So he might actually direct his wrath. Your sin may be greater than his stumbling in as far as consequences reaped. The 28th. So even your enemies have a powerful ally in heaven, because he loves his children and those who want nothing to do with him, pretty much all the same. That's the definition of unconditional and impartial love. And the 29th saying, do not fret because of evildoers, and do not envy the wicked. This takes us back to our earliest verse. He reiterates much what he said. He says, do not envy the evildoers. Here he's saying, do not fret. These people can cause alarm, just their presence and surrounding and the fact of their existence causes many a righteous person to stammer in fear out of what they may do. Very often the threat they think they pose bears no rooting in reality, but that's just one of the temptations of being surrounded and envying the wicked. We already covered that, the temptation, because the wicked do have a way of prospering in the world. For there is no future in the evildoer. The lamp of the wicked is put out. So the entire reason why the temptation even exists to envy evildoers is that they seem to be prospering at other people's expense, and bad for them, but good for them. But they have they're not investing in eternity. They're investing in this life here and now, and one day they're going to die, and the world's going to keep spinning at the same rate it always was, and someone's going to get all of their stuff. So it's not doing evil and being an evildoer is not a solid, sound investment for eternity. That is the path we are on, or if you're on any other path, I welcome you to join that path now. The 30th and final saying, my son, fear Yahweh and the king. Do not mingle with those who change. So in our contemporary culture, we evolve and accelerate the cultural norms and styles and everything else seems at a rapid rate of accelerated activity. But the fact is, throughout the ancient world, stability was valued above of revolution. So that's just the ancient mindset. And fear Yahweh and the king. The king is his anointed. He was endowed and is authorized and anointed by Yahweh above him. So how we treat his human king is a fair indicator of how we treat the heavenly king. For their calamity arises suddenly, and who knows the ruin of both of them? So those who are have an appetite for change, the latest fad, the newest thing, the latest indulgence or trend, they're going to invite calamity, and it's going to hit them without their expectation because they're so caught up in the pace of change they have kind of committed themselves to, of living in flux, no stability, no moors, no anchor, and that invites calamity and destruction. But there is a way out, and that is much of what the book of Proverbs is dedicated to teaching us, and of course what I am dedicating to explaining to you. So that's all the time we have for today. There are a few more verses in this chapter, but we didn't we wanted to keep it on the sayings alone. So I'll see you next time. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until then. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.